Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 5th session of the GSV Virtual Summit. I hope everyone is safe and hanging in there. I went downstairs this morning in full professional dress for the first time in a while, and my 2-year-old daughter looked absolutely shocked and proclaimed, "Mama is a princess," which I was amused by. Today we have a terrific lineup, starting with a panel of philanthropic leaders on the future of work, which I'll be moderating. Followed by a panel moderated by Michael Moe on how big tech sees the future of digital education, and finally a fireside chat with Deborah Quazzo and Jeb Bush. So with that, I'm thrilled to welcome our distinguished panelists for the first panel. If I can welcome Dick George, the Chairman, President, and CEO of Ascendium Education Group, Bill Hansen, the President and CEO of Strada Education Network, Jamie Merisotis, the President and CEO of Illumina Foundation, and finally Jeremy Wheaton, the President and CEO of ECMC Group. Welcome. Great. So to kick it off, I'd love it if each of you could introduce your organization and share who are the students that you're serving and what are your students experiencing right now. I really want to ground the conversation in our students. And let's start with you, Jamie.
Great. So first of all, thank you very much, Julia, and thank you to you and to Deborah and Michael and all of your GSV colleagues for continuing to host these important forums, especially given our new reality. So, I want to say we're really privileged to be one of your partners in the shared mission of helping to, I think, get more people the education they need to succeed in the changing world that we face. And that's obviously, it's never been more important. Some of you know Illumina Foundation. For those of you who don't, we're a private foundation, meaning in a technical sense, we're legally established as an endowment. So we have to spend a certain percentage of our assets every year on grants and other charitable purposes. So if you think about Illumina, you can think about us in the same category as places like Ford Foundation or Kresge Foundation, Hewlett, et cetera. I wanted to mention this in part because philanthropy is really this rich and broad term that includes private foundations like Lumina, community foundations, family foundations, corporate foundations, and it also includes a lot of other organizations like some of the great ones that are represented on this panel that aren't foundations in the same way that Lumina is as a private foundation, but are very philanthropic in their aims and goals, and are really serving a very important public purpose. I'm currently the chair of the Council on Foundations, a sort of national organization representing the sphere of philanthropy. And, I'm called on a lot to talk about the evolving nature of philanthropy. And Lumina is a good illustration of how philanthropy is changing as we speak. We're a quote unquote traditional private foundation, but we're doing something pretty non-traditional, which is we're aiming all of our work squarely at trying to aim the country at achieving a specific national goal. We've done that by articulating this goal of 60% of Americans having a high quality degree, certificate, industry certification, or other credential by 2025. And we've tried to use a combination of our grant making and frankly, our expertise and our influence to help the nation get there. So you may be interested in knowing that since we established the goal in 2008, the country's actually increased attainment nationally from 38 to 48%. So that's good, that's real progress. But we obviously have a long way to go, and COVID-19 is really threatening to set back that progress if we don't act boldly. So, we're as an organization, like my colleagues here on this panel, focus on meeting the rapidly changing societal need for talent, because that talent can power economy and strengthen our democracy. In particular, Illumina's focused on eliminating equity gaps in educational attainment. We're very focused on these issues related to race, because we think they've contributed to the growing disparities that I think we've all seen play out in real time here with the pandemic. I think a lack of access to high quality learning opportunities after high school with the right kinds of academic and financial and other supports has really denied Black, Latino, and American Indian people opportunities to advance economically and fully participate in society. So, you can see that at Lumina expressed in our grant making. You can see that in the entrepreneurs and companies we invest in through our impact investing efforts. You can see that in terms of how we hold ourselves publicly accountable through data and other information. Last point, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues, is simply that I want to underscore here, and I think we'll come back to this in our conversation, that I think our current crisis provides an opportunity to rethink how we bring education to a lot more Americans, including those who I mentioned have been left out. At the end of the day, I think those of us in philanthropy, foundations like Lumina, we really have to maximize our endowments to serve society's needs. We have to take risks that maybe others can't or won't. And we have to serve as influencers and informers to meet the needs of those individuals who deserve fairer and more just outcomes than the one they're achieving now. So thank you very much for the chance to be here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Jamie. Bill?
Well, thank you, Julia. Again, thanks for having us. I know we would all rather be in San Diego under the normal ASU GSV summits, but and also, Jamie, thank you for teeing this up. I thought that was very helpful. And I think all 4 organizations on the call today are structured different missions, but all have a common purpose in helping move the needle, especially in the education to employment and really the completion agenda. So really appreciate the good work of all of the leaders that are on this panel today. But, just at Strada, we are a little bit different. We're a public charity, and gives us maybe some different structural approaches to things, which we've been able to try to leverage to, again, really help work towards what we're calling completion with a purpose, and really trying to help bridge the education to employment gap. And we do this through our national engagement activities, which includes our philanthropy work, but also our the Institute for the Future of Work, and but also a lot of the work that we're doing at the state level. And one of the things that I might differentiate us a little bit is we had a joint venture with the Gallup organization for several years, and have now launched our own Center for Consumer Insights, which is really the voice of the consumer, which I think is sometimes missing in all of the work that we're about, and working with policymakers and funders and companies and others that are all trying to solve the challenges in our country, but having the view of what really matters to the consumer, I think is critically important. We also, as the others on the call today, have really I think a very impactful social impact funding mechanism with our strategic investing, and again, some, I think, really terrific work with Deb and Michael with their work, but also with others on the phone and others on the call. And we also have been really trying to also bring solutions to the table, and maybe we'll get to some of these in the later part of the conversation, but the companies such as Education at Work that provide internships on college campuses and job pathways to employers, MC, which is an economic modeling company, and Inside Track, which really in this environment with the college coaching issues are more important than ever, but also Road Trip Nation and CALE, which is the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, are all just incredibly important parts of our network. And so really for a little bit different, where we try to get the combustibility of our national engagement and philanthropy work, our investment work, but also operating the companies that are in our network and getting really hopefully the synergies and the combustible effect to move the needle for our consumers.
Thanks, Bill. And Jeremy?
Thanks, Julia. I'll echo Jamie and Bill's thanks to you, and certainly to Deborah and Michael for holding this. It's great to give us a voice, and similar to Jamie and Bill, yeah, we're all made a little bit differently. Julia, nobody told me I was a princess this morning, so you're way ahead of the rest of us. I'm going to question my family and how I can be a prince each morning. I get up and go to work. But at ECMC Group, we approach things a little bit differently too. We've got really a unique education nonprofit stance, where we focus primarily on financial literacy and post-secondary career and technical education delivery. We actually have 3 career technical education schools that we're really getting to see firsthand on the front row how COVID's impacting them. You know, we also have a lot of philanthropic work and impact investing, similar to what Bill spoke about as well. And we do that through our different affiliates, ECMC, ECMC Education, ECMC Foundation, and then ECMC Group. And holistically, as we look at things across all of our affiliates, our primary goal is to help students succeed. And, you know, you asked who we're serving across all of our affiliates. Primarily, we're serving students who are under-resourced and underserved, most times Pell eligible, first-generation students. I'd say the new traditional student, right? The student who's got a family at home, that's got a job, working. And, you know, really how we're looking to serve them right now and with Lumina and Strada and Ascendium is unless they're comfortable, unless they have food to eat, they have housing, they have mental wellness, it's difficult for them to benefit. And this crisis has really highlighted that divide and the need for what we're doing. And I think what's been added now to those basic needs is internet access and devices and the tools to be able to do that. So as we've identified where we can do the best work right now, you know, it's really serving the 1,200 students that we serve at our career and technical schools, but through our grantees and those that have pipelines into the students who need this, it's really focusing on those basic needs and getting small grants immediately out to them to ensure that they have the ability to benefit. And all 4 of us here on the panel are working together on that pivot and getting the money out there through our National Post-Secondary Funders Collaborative. So we've, you know, already put a couple of $1 million to work on that front. We've got a goal to get $9 million in the hands of students and organizations that can immediately help folks. You know, we've been able to flip all 1,200 of our students to a work from home inside of a week. And those are students, you know, 80% are students of color. As I mentioned, 80% of them are getting Pell grants and are really focused on allied health and the skilled trades, which, you know, we need more than ever right now. So, you know, really, I'd say our early observations is that the work we're doing is helping people benefit and hopefully improve their ability to earn a family sustaining wage as we come out of COVID and, you know, the 28 million jobs that are short right now come back online.
Great. And I believe Dick is audio only. Dick, can you hear us?
Yes, I can, Julia.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Unfortunately, as I'm apparently sheltering in place, I'm sheltering so well that my camera can't find me. Not sure what the technical difficulty is, but so be it. Thanks so much for having me join the panel. I've enjoyed the summit series virtually so far, and hopefully we'll be able to make some contribution to folks who have tuned in today. Ascendium Group is, as Strada, we are a public charity, and as such that gives us some unique flexibilities. The Ascendium Education Group of nonprofit and for-profit companies is a little bit unusual in that we are both an operating company in the student loan space, serving millions of borrowers for over 50 years. And in addition to our operating companies, we are also a large philanthropy in the post-secondary space. All of our companies, both nonprofit and for-profit, all of the companies dividend all of their net margins to support our philanthropic work. Our philanthropic work is focused on post-secondary access and success, and we measure success somewhat differently than traditional post-secondary educations that look at degree completion. Completion is obviously important to us, but we really measure success as the transition from education to work. And as Bill mentioned, Strada's focus, that's a focus that we share directly. Without a meaningful transition to work, there is no success for our focus group of borrowers. And our grant making is focused primarily on removing systemic barriers faced by learners, particularly from low-income backgrounds. And within that low-income background, we're focused primarily on historically underrepresented groups, first-generation students, incarcerated adults, rural community members, students of color, and veterans. We do a lot of work in our 4 focus areas of our philanthropy, which include removing systemic barriers to success, working with institutions to remove barriers that prevent our target demographic from succeeding at post-secondary education. Our second focus area is streamlining transitions from education to work. And then we have particular focus on expanding high education education for the prison population in this country, which unfortunately on a per capita basis, we have more people incarcerated in the United States than any place in the world. It's a critical part of our labor shortfall if we can't have that population educated and meaningfully participating in the workforce, not only to reduce re-entry into the prison system itself, reduce recidivism, but most importantly, producing millions of educated folks who can join the labor force. And then our fourth focus is developing rural education and workforce training. For far too long, too much of the philanthropy spend has been focused on urban areas. It's reasonable to understand why that occurs. Most of the research organizations are urban centered, and those are populations that meaningful programs can scale fairly easily. But the per capita spend for our rural communities is very, very underfunded, and we see a very, very compelling need to move more effort into rural education and transition to meaningful work going forward. So look forward to the discussion this morning, and again, I apologize for my effective sheltering.
Great, thanks, Dick. Bill, Strada has been leading weekly surveys on the sort of changing sentiment of work and school. I'd love to hear some of the insights that you're gathering from those surveys.
Julia, thank you. And we've been working on these, developing these insights, but really about 6 weeks ago, we started a national poll every week, and actually just about 2 hours ago, put out our latest iteration, and it's actually called Public Viewpoint, and you can access it on our website. All of this data is publicly available, but just the data that came out today indicates that 34% of Americans said if they were to lose their jobs, they would need more education. And the other things that are coming out of this is those who feel that they need more education and training, 64%, or almost 2/3, would look for a job in a different career field. And obviously with approaching 30 million unemployed individuals out there, this is potentially a massive undertaking for us. And I think a couple of the important considerations that are coming out of this is that we're, of those who are considering enrolling in the next 6 months, and this is in addition to our current fall enrollment process, more people are looking for non-degree programs. And of those who think they're going to need more education or training, the majority of those, 54%, are looking to online options. And so, in last week, our survey that came out actually really also heightened, we've been able to aggregate the data over the last couple of weeks and to really show the disproportionate impact that this is having on our minority populations, and especially the African American and Hispanic communities, and just the increasing level of anxiety for those populations. And so this is also where we're, it's validating our approach of, our thesis of who we're trying to serve are the 4.5 million disengaged youth between 16 and 24 years old. Also the 44 million working adults, and this is all pre-COVID, of her earning individually less than $35,000 a year, as a family less than $70,000 a year, and who do not have anything beyond or actually below an associate's degree, and helping them get back on the upskilling pathway. And then also, even with our 20 million university students, I think our country and our systems have just failed miserably over the last 50 years. As the Pell study indicates, of the bottom 2 quartiles, the needles have moved substantially for the top quartile and the second quartile, but for the third quartile and the bottom quartile, they barely moved. And so this is already, the populations that were most being left behind by our current system. And obviously, with this, the COVID situation and where we are right now, with the tens of millions of Americans being unemployed, it's just, again, heightening the compelling need we need to make to have systemic changes, or I'm calling an ecosystem change in our country, to make sure that we're addressing all of these populations, but with a heightened focus on those minority and disadvantaged populations.
Thanks, Bill. I think this is starting to get at our big question, which is how we think the education system is going to evolve in light of this crisis. And if we look at like the 2008 recession, we saw enrollments jump about 16%, mostly flowing to community colleges. Jamie, do you think we're going to see something similar here? And the provider landscape looks very, very different than it did in 2008, which was 4 years before even Coursera was founded. How is it? Where are students going to go? How is it going to be shaped?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I want to underscore Bill's point here that again, not to be too stark about this, but COVID-19 mortality rates for African Americans are twice what they are for whites. So you just look at that single statistic and you come to recognize that the disparities here that we've long known by race, by income, and many of these other factors are really being accentuated as a result of this crisis. So now you look at the sort of broader impacts that you're talking about in terms of what happens to the sector here. Probably should remind everyone here that the pandemic hit just as we were already starting to see declining enrollment in higher education. So in 2019, there were 250,000 fewer students enrolled in higher education than there were the year before. And that's the sort of net result of both demographics, but also what I think we all recognize are the challenges with skyrocketing tuition and some other things. So, we're not going to know until next year for certain what's going to happen, but it's pretty clear based on historic patterns here that what tends to happen in recessionary periods, and this one could drag on for quite a while, is that employers will become more selective in terms of who they hire because they can, because the talent pool is larger. And that means that individuals are going to have to up their skills. And this is the point that I think Dick and Jeremy in particular were making that I think is really important. So on the provider side, there's going to be winners and losers. Again, even before coronavirus, 30% of the colleges tracked by Moody's were running deficits. 15% of public colleges and universities in the United States have less than 90 days of operating cash on hand. Moody's ranked the whole sector from stable to negative just last month. And American Council on Education, the umbrella group I mentioned earlier, is saying that there's going to be a decline of over $20 billion in revenues for higher education just in the coming academic year. So, I think the biggest interest has to be on the regional institutions, on the minority serving colleges and universities, HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions and tribal colleges, and the community colleges, because they're not going to get the support that they need to build out their technology, to serve these critical populations that we're talking about. And I think that they're going to need to build both new academic pathways, but also new student support pathways, which are going to be so critical to the success of these students over the long term.
Dick, Jeremy, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'll just say, Julia, that the digital divide is the other thing this is really highlighted, right? So you heard Bill say, and Jamie as well, that more and more folks are going to need access to online education. So really focusing there and ensuring that the access that has really increased over the last 30 years or so flows through into the online realm. Before COVID-19, trust that traditional four-year education was the right path for folks. All of those stats were headed down. The 18 to 22-year-old demographic is headed down and to the right. Even our new traditional population is plateauing. So there's going to be more demand, but a pickier consumer from a student perspective. So how do you make sure that you're offering what folks need? We've got to be working with employers. To Jamie's point on community colleges and states having the resources, the federal government having the resources. It's getting employers to engage and help you educate employees the way they want to see them and with what they need, and participating in that as well. So I know we'll talk about it more later, but we've seen a lot of success with that model, and we're seeing it persist through the COVID-19 crisis. I think it's just going to be important to Bill's research, so timely, only 2 hours ago, but had a chance to spin down through it. It's saying exactly what we're seeing, which is stackable credentials, a pathway. Students just want to get back to work, but they also realize they've got to reskill so that when the next crisis hits, they're in the strongest position to take advantage of the opportunities that are out there.
As Jeremy mentioned, central to everything that everyone has been mentioning is the employer and the role that the employer plays. What collaborations have you seen between employers and your institutions, or what sort of collaborations are you seeing that are working in bringing together learning and work?
Is that to me, Julia?
That will be to, let's see, to Dick, and then we'll see who else wants to chime in.
Cool.
Yeah, let me echo what Jamie and Jeremy were saying about what we expect in terms of the demand for additional reskilling and education. Clearly, we're going to see that, but it's going to be very, very different this time than it was after the financial crisis. The advances in online education, digital learning, are so dramatically different, and the return on investment from traditional post-secondary education is very, very different now than it was after the last crisis. And I think what has to happen is we have to look at reskilling and additional education differently. It needs to be faster, it needs to be cheaper, and it needs to be more directly intertwined with the skills that employers are looking for. But as Jeremy mentioned, it depends in large part on what employers are going to do. And employers have traditionally used associate degrees and baccalaureate degrees as the filters for employment. And employers need to change that. they need to look at stackable credentials. They need to look at compilation of experience, compilation of skills, all of which can be digitally transformed into synthetic degrees, but employers need to engage with this new form of learning so that we see reskilling and education as shorter, less expensive, more directly meaningful to the skill sets that employers are looking for. And that's a massive transformation of the workplace that's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of changes in public policy, but at the end of the day, it has to be employer-driven to recognize that the old filters need to be supplemented by this new form of faster, cheaper, more meaningful learning.
Jamie?
Yeah, I just want to add to Dick's excellent point there, which is, and Bill and I have actually talked about this at varying points, which is that, look, there is this ecosystem and there are lots of players in this ecosystem. The federal government is probably, because of COVID-19, going to have to play a more substantial role. We know what's going to happen to state budgets. We know that the resources available to increase the learning that we're talking about in states is going to be constrained, but the federal government's going to have to provide some sort of support there. But the thing we don't talk enough about is that employers are already a major player in this business, right? Employers spend $500 billion a year on employee education and training. And thinking about this ecosystem of where employers are making major investments, the federal government and states are making major investments, and private capital markets have the opportunity to make more substantial investments than maybe they've made before, because they have an opportunity to actually steer the system. That's some of the work that all of us, including GSV, are participating in those kind of conversations, is trying to direct capital to those who can actually create this kind of change. I think that's the way we've got to be thinking about this. So I think this sort of idea that that education needs to provide better service to employers is sort of an outdated notion. There's an ecosystem here where the employees and the employers are participating in a real-time labor market where skills expire much more rapidly. So, the old model of first you learn and then you work is really being changed by this ongoing learning model where employers, the federal government, and others have to be working together in a sort of collaborative approach to increase the skill level, to target those equity gaps that all of us have been talking about in order to improve economic outcomes as well as the social outcomes that are so important.
So can we talk a little bit about the role of the federal and the state government in enabling this ecosystem? You all have mentioned shorter form courses, these alternative credentials, which are great, but are largely inaccessible if you need Pell funding or other sources of funding. So what role should the state and federal government play? I mean, there are calls for sort of massive reform pre-COVID. And I think one of the questions is that Jamie and I talked about is this our GI Bill moment? Why or why not? And what role should the government be playing?
Julie, if I could, and I just maybe to build off of what Jamie and Dick just spoke to as well. And I think as much as we need the employers and the government and institutions to be involved, I still believe that we also have to have this be a demand-based approach. And just even a couple of things that we're learning, Inside Track, our coaching solution, actually just last month partnered with Futuro Health to help address the health worker shortage created by COVID-19. And MC also just, they're actually helping the decision makers to be better informed of the displaced workers and also the aspiring learners in the near term. And we've actually produced a free skills match tool and a free resume optimizer and a job posting dashboard that tracks the economic impact daily. And so I think that all of these areas, again, and a lot of us have been in the public policy realm, and I think to get to your current question, it still has to be driven by, we are in such a different state now than we were in 1965 or 72 when the Higher Education Act was put into place, or the things that were built upon it over the last several decades. And the availability that we have of data, student by student, worker by worker, we really need to change our obsolete systems and turn them, actually get rid of them, and frankly start over, because the flow of the $180 billion of Title IV aid, the $500 million that Jamie was talking about from the employer, the state aid, and again, we obviously need to support our current system as we know it, of our higher education system, but we have to create a system that doesn't just serve 20 million, but serves 30 or 40 million individuals. And that next 10 or 20 million of individuals are going to be these 44 million working adults who don't have access to the opportunities of learning and upskilling, much less the 26, 27 million unemployed. And so, and again, I just think that this is an opportunity, as of, again, the necessity is the mother of invention, and crisis is the mother of innovation, and we are there. And it is going to take us several years to get back to any sense of normalcy. And a lot of the work that we were doing pre-COVID with employers, right now it's just getting people back to work and getting our students back to school. And so we're going to be in this kind of rescue and recovery effort, but that's got to lead directly into the innovation and impact realm that we're looking to come out of this, just like we did either after the GI Bill or the recession of over a decade ago.
And Jeremy, can you share some bright spots? Because you have some examples where you've partnered with employers where you're seeing actually a lot of success working with vulnerable populations. Can you share some bright spots here?
Sure, you bet. And I will say, Julie, before we kind of leave this point, Jamie alluded to, there's billions of dollars on the sidelines ready to come into the marketplace. And I think one place through the crisis here that's been great on the state, federal, and accreditor side of things is the increased flexibility given to institutions to adapt to the current environment. So just as we look forward, it doesn't take any money to give folks more flexibility, of course, with the appropriate checks and balances to ensure the efficacy of the teaching and the things that are getting done. But extending out the ability for institutions to share and get approval on an expedited basis to be able to deliver their curriculum from a distance, to use different lab and competency techniques to be able to confirm that the learning has occurred, even if it hasn't been in a traditional sense within the labs, within the classroom. And that's a good segue for me into something that we started back in 2018, which is really closely partnering on the HVAC front in the Atlanta marketplace to build out a new lab, but to engage regional and national HVAC leaders in the development of that curriculum and have them involved in the classroom. And they're still there today. They're attending via Zoom. They're using their materials, their settings to help us move through different HVAC problems. But what we've seen through that is an increased engagement, even as we've gone to distance learning in our student body. So even though we're 100% online and we'll need to check some competencies that we're not able to do from a distance when we get back into the office place, we've seen really high levels of retention, even higher than we saw in the classroom. Our attendance has been very positive. The belief that they can be successful online has been surveying weekly, has been in the mid-90s. So the satisfaction levels, the attendance, the outcomes has been very positive. And I attribute that to what we started with our HVAC employers, a couple of years ago, that they're in the classroom referring to the students, really as their employees and excited about developing things. The other thing that we saw from that is an increase in their pay rates. So we recognized that we were graduating students maybe at stage 1, stage 2 on the pay grade, but if we augmented the curriculum just a touch, they could come out and be at a stage 3 and make a couple of dollars more an hour, which is hugely impactful when you're talking about this level. So for us, I think there's a increased belief that even on the career and technical education front, that we can utilize technology, that we can use at a distance and work from home, which limits the cost of the delivery of the program while increasing the efficacy and the employability of our at-risk population.
Great. So a final question is, as we sit right here, what makes you optimistic about the future of post-secondary education? And if you each could take just 1 minute, starting with Dick.
Yeah, I think what makes me most optimistic is that the pandemic is actually accelerating the necessity of reform in post-secondary education. I think we're seeing that across the board in many different spaces. You know, as we look at changes in the way developmental education is taught, the emergence of open educational resources, the willingness to move away from single high-stakes tests to place students in courses, all of these reforms backed by evidence, you know, clearly demonstrate that equity gaps are in fact closable, that post-secondary education can change. But, you know, to go back to the question about state and local and federal government input, all of the philanthropic money in the world isn't going to be able to change this quickly enough without effective use of federal, state, and local monies. And one of the things that we see repeatedly is that there are far too many state programs where the dollars that are offered to support post-secondary education are done on a first-come, first-served basis without any metrics or data analysis of what the outcomes are. And so I think we need to focus on that. We need to focus on acceleration of the reforms that are already in place. But I'm optimistic that this all can be done, and I think the pandemic is going to give us real cause to look much more focused on these changes and move them forward.
Great. 30 seconds from Bill.
I would agree, Dick, and just again, you know, I feel like the unprecedented amounts of also aid that is coming out of Washington with the stimulus packages, and again, a lot of this is just going to be to help on the rescue and the recovery efforts, but I think it is really an opportunity to also start putting into place the innovations that are going to be really required. And I think there was an appetite for this before COVID-19 hit. And I think in many ways, this is again just going to accelerate the opportunity for us to really make some very, very fundamental changes. And again, I believe technology and a demand-based system is going to require us to create the systemic changes that we're going to need to make sure we're supporting our families and learners going forward.
Jamie?
Yeah, I've got a new book coming out in the fall called Human Work in the Age of Smart Machines. So I think you sort of know my view of we clearly are at a moment where we've actually got to prepare people for the significant change that's coming as a result of technology. So let me just say quickly, I'm optimistic. I think Dick's right that necessity is going to force change. The only point I'll add to what Bill and Dick said is, in the Great Recession, government allocated resources to essentially keep the current system going. But now I think government's going to have to allocate resources to fuel change, to keep the best parts of that system going, but to prepare people for this human work of the future. And I think this crisis is going to force the change that we inevitably had to go through, that we missed the opportunity on in 2008 and 2010, but for which we have no choice today.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I certainly agree with Dick's points on this being a tipping point in the acceleration, so I won't repeat Jamie, Bill, and Dick's commentary there. I will say I'm excited for the work ECMC Foundation has done over the last couple of years, putting in the infrastructure to have 600 fellows over the next few years in the field working on CTE leadership collaborative, and really working to take advantage of this acceleration that we're coming out of, getting those folks, I think, out into the field and the infrastructure in place to be able to learn from what's happening and share those learnings and the research, as well as getting more CTE leadership in the field and media to cover it is going to be a real positive for us. That if not for the work of that team and our board over the last couple of years, wouldn't have been positioned to work through this. So I appreciate that.
Okay, well, thank all of you. Thank you for being on this panel, and thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Julia.
So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michael Moe for our next panel. Oh, and I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. Just said, welcome everybody. Thank you for that terrific panel. And I'm very excited for our next panel that is Tech Superstars' view on the future of digital learning. Should be a lot of fun. Before we get kicked off with our different panelists, I want to remind everybody tomorrow we have a special episode of the Summit Series where it's our privilege to have Dr. Michael Crowe, President of Arizona State University, with us. We're going to be doing that at 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern, and 11 o'clock Greenwich time tomorrow afternoon and evening. As people know, Dr. Crowe has been listed as Time Magazine's one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Arizona State is the largest public university in the United States, and for the last 5 years in a row has been voted by U.S. News and World Report as the most innovative university in the United States. It also has been ranked as the #1 organization in the United States for sustainability efforts consistent with the UN's goals. And should be just an absolute fascinating session. Again, starting at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And so now I just wanted to introduce my panelists from our Tech Superstars. First, Stephen Bucci, Head of Education at Google Cloud. Michael King, VP and General Manager at Global Education at IBM. Andrew Coe, Global Director of Education and Workforce at AWS, Amazon. Our old friend Jessica Lindell, VP of Global Education at Unity. And then Anthony Salcido, who people know Anthony for a long time as the VP of Education at Microsoft, which he still is, but he's also the interim Vice President for Public Sector and Government at Microsoft as well. And so just to put some context behind this as it relates to the panel and how important technology is. Just 10 years ago, Google had a market cap of around $100 billion. Today, it's $875 billion. Amazon had a market cap of just $25 billion. Today, it's $1.2 trillion. And Microsoft had a market cap of about $175 billion. It's now $1.3 trillion. And if you look at the 5 largest technology companies in the world, we have 4 on this panel, it's approximately 20% of the S&P 500. So in other words, 5 companies alone are 20% of the S&P 500 value. So just incredible influence technology has in society and overall business. And we're excited about the influence and impact that technology we believe is going to have in the digital learning space as we look ahead. So just to kick off the panel, what I'd like to ask first is just as it relates to, this crisis that we've been in with the Corona, what have you learned during the crisis? And maybe I'll give that to Anthony first and we'll kind of go around the horn.
Thanks, Michael. And certainly we've learned a lot. And one of the good things about this journey is we're dealing with it globally and we're learning quickly from both exemplars and challenges that we're facing. I think I was surprised by the lack of readiness institutions had to remote learning as a concept. Many faculty were prepared to embrace these tools and modalities. And the initial phase, and still in many cases has been the phase, has been a translation to digital classrooms. So taking lectures and experiences that would happen in a traditional setting and move them online versus thinking more holistically about a digital canvas of asynchronous blended modalities more naturally. So I think there's still progress to be made there, but we're learning from best practices and examples every single day and getting smarter as a company and getting smarter to support tools for educators and learners.
Thank you. Jessica.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having us. I just wanted to give a shout out to you guys as well. Our team has been on most of these sessions. It's just really brought our community together. So thanks for all your effort in doing these. So as everyone knows, Unity is a little bit earlier stage than my peers on this panel. And as a result of that, we have the opportunity to have a really broad view of education. And so I'm just going to dive into the 4 different areas that we're supporting and give our key learning there. And I'll just do that in a few minutes because I could spend the whole call doing that. So the first area that we manage is the work in all of our global schools, middle schools, high schools, universities, advanced degrees. I think the key learning that we had during this crisis was we've got to support our educators even more. Specifically, educators who were technically savvy, already teaching Unity and real-time 3D. They wanted us to jump in and deliver that live virtual training for them, which we did, and we've had amazing experiences and responses. Educators from the hardest hit areas of the world. Obviously, we started this off in China in January, Italy, our own country here in the US. The gratitude and the community building that's happening globally as a result of that live virtual training has been significant. The second area that we focus on is we have a huge global community of self-paced learners who are either hobbyists wanting to create their own video games, their real-time 3D, or they are aspiring professionals wanting to reskill and upskill. And what we've seen, not dissimilar to Coursera's numbers that we saw, is just a massive increase in the amount of those learners wanting to upskill and reskill, and an ask, which is, Unity, can you go broader in the work that you're doing and helping us get into these jobs and teach skills outside of the Unity platform? So you'll see announcements coming from us that are going to be a broader set of partnerships with traditional universities and alternative programs to get broader jobs. The third area that we handle is all of the enterprise corporate training, that $500 billion number that is so staggering, on how we reskill all of our employers and our customers. And what we've seen during this time is just a significant ask for, keep this live learning going that you used to deliver to us in person, deliver it virtually. And as a result, we're building community in our companies that are no longer able to work in person together. And so we all know that learning together builds community, but that's been a really exciting result. And then finally, as everyone knows, thousands of real-time experiences are built on the Unity platform. And we're all familiar with this commentary of, software eating the world. What we like to think is that learning is fueling the world. So again, every opportunity that's created on Unity for real-time 3D, massive increase in use across all industries and fields of study.
Yeah, I think learning fueling the world is a great framework for sure. Michael, what have you guys learned during the crisis?
Well, I think what we have learned is that technology has been kind of a nice to have in classrooms, and that for a lot of the institutions that we work with, as Anthony said, many of them simply weren't prepared for this. At the other extreme, I think we've had some institutions that really were quite prepared. For example, I have a school system that had been implementing digital learning days for many years, actually practicing this to send kids home to keep the lessons going. And what I think we have seen is that technology is a critical enabler, but there's a lot that has to go around this, from teacher training to leadership training, to really looking at how you transform the entire educational experience to leverage technology. So I think coming out of this, we're going to see a lot more focus on how do we really use technology not as a tool for individual teachers, but how do we systemically use technology across education in a way that can ensure that learning keeps happening regardless of where the student is, and that we can ensure that those learners are progressing to where we want them to be.
Awesome. Andrew, what do you learn?
Michael, I think we at Amazon Web Services just learned an incredible amount. But before I even begin there, I want to first take this opportunity and really thank a lot of the educators out there. I mean, I think this clearly are unprecedented times. We ourselves as individuals are trying to learn ourselves how to work from home and really collaborate and be effective and take care of our own young ones in the family. And at the same time, the educators have to do their own personal, we'll call it adaptation or adoption to this new environment, while also taking care of our own learners. So I want to just make sure that I want to just personally recognize a lot of those educators who are working extremely hard to get all of the folks to continuously learn.
Thank you.
Two things. Two things I'd just like to say. I think it's very common. Yes, we also recognize that a lot of folks were not prepared. Even those that were prepared, there were some small gaps that also needed to be covered. For us, I'd say it was just almost back to basics. Do they have the right infrastructure? Will this thing scale? Our customers are universities, institutions, technology companies, publishers, and even, well, of course, the K-12, but we were being approached by governments, ministers of education. How do I keep everything of all the hundreds of thousands of learners in Bahrain through the Minister of Education, or in Brazil, the million, where they were not ever designed or thought to even scale all at the same time around the world, of really having everybody scale and have that level of performance. And that was one of those things that we all really wanted to assist all of those customers in a very simplified way. And getting to that basic thing, where do they have connectivity? Do they have devices? It was not surprising, but there was a lot of challenges of even understanding that, and how many of those students or those learners or those homes had even access to even turn anything on. Forget it even getting to the technology. Anthony mentioned also educators as well as Jessica. I completely agree. I think there's a great amount of evangelists who really get the technology. We recognize that there were a vast majority of them did not know how to leverage it. And so part of the thing that we launched, we had actually close to 1,000 educator volunteers to just go up there and just be there through webinars of basic things like, how do I manage a classroom online? So it was really good. And the lesson that we learned is educators just like to talk to educators. They don't want to talk to myself or a technologist. And there was a certain level of comfort. And as such, just within several weeks, we had over 14,000 to 15,000 people participate across those webinars. So those are the type of things that we saw specifically that we'll call it lessons learned during this crisis. And now I think as we start to hopefully move out of the crisis into a recovery or improvement mode, we're seeing some new innovations occur as well.
Great. Stephen.
Thank you for having me, and agree with Andrew. Thank you to all of our educators out there, especially adapting to this crisis. I think the two things we've learned, the first is the amount of resilience in light of this really quick pivot. And I think the last panel was talking about how this has forced some people to move probably faster than they've been wanting to. We've seen it in the numbers. The fact that Google Classroom in just the past few months doubled in active usage to 100 million users. Like, that's pretty unprecedented. And it shows the resilience of people adapting to this new normal of what it is now. The second thing that I think we've learned as well is how much opportunity there is in data-driven decisions. I was reading an article in the New York Times by Dr. Christina Paxson from Brown University. And she was mentioning as schools start to come back in the university side in the fall, there's so much data needed around contact tracing, around how's our population, what's the infection rate in our population. I think that creates a big opportunity for both universities, higher education, and technology providers to come together and provide tools around that need.
Great, thank you. And I'd ask the panelists, because we do have 5 of them, there's so much to want to cover, if we could keep our answers as tight as possible. And I'd love interaction between, if you want to jump in, please do. Also want to remind the audience, we'll be taking questions. So go to the question tab, and we'd be delighted to provide the questions to our very esteemed panel. So question, on a 1 to 10, 1 being bad or 1 being not important, 10 being extraordinarily important, how important is education to your company's future? I'm going to start with Michael King.
So, Michael, I go back to a book that you wrote many years ago called The Book of Knowledge, I think, which started me and us on a path around looking at education, not just as schools and universities.
I apologize for that.
But lifelong learning, right? And you've been on this theme for a while, as have we, right? So the P-TECH program that we launched was about connecting high schools to college to career. We've got well over 200 of these P-TECHs around the globe now, other employers sponsoring those. So as I think about education for IBM, it's critically important. We are both a major employer and have to train not just our own employees, but business partners and clients. We have our foundation, and a lot of our corporate investments are geared around what we call IBM skills, which are major investments like P-TECH to try to develop skills across the globe and to address some of the impact that technology is going to have on learning. And so our business as well is critically important. So how we can build the solutions and capability to help people across both the education domain, but as well as the workforce domain, and bringing those together. And so I think that's very important to us as a company.
So 10.
Yeah.
Good. Anthony.
I don't think anyone's not going to say 10. I'll just give you 2 examples from Microsoft. In our mission and in our acquisitions, certainly our mission to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. I think that focus is aligned very well to the mission of education systems globally. Our new CEO, Satya Nadella, made really 3 big acquisitions, all related to this specific issue. The first one he did as CEO was Minecraft, with the acquisition of Mojang, which is really, in many ways, the first pathway we have in schools to help students learn to code, get excited about using technology to make and create, and then build purposeful skills on their way to employment, which was connected to, obviously, our acquisition of LinkedIn, bringing this path from schools to career more holistically focused. That's going to be an even greater need for society as we go forward and deal with the economic backlash of what's going on in societies globally. And then obviously GitHub to enable tech careers and tech sharing and collaboration to be core, and certainly the role of preparing students in university with skills that will be certainly needed in the workplace, as well as aligning their talents to solve challenges with technology, whether it's accessing huge data sets with quantum computing and cloud, to help with the future virus protection that we're going to have a need for. I think there's going to be a huge catalyst, and it's really reflected in Microsoft's not only the work we do every day in schools and universities, but the foundation of what we've been doing as a company strategically.
Great. I'm going to come back to LinkedIn in a little bit if we get a chance. Andrew.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think anybody's going to say below a 10. Yeah, for us here at Amazon Web Services, and clearly Amazon, education is extremely important. We have over hundreds of millions of students, parents, educators in over 200 countries and territories leveraging our technologies. And in fact, we've been in the cloud for over 13 years. And one of the early adopters of cloud was actually researchers in education. They were the ones that were there early adopting, saw the value of it. And now as we start to see that cloud's now becoming more of a core fabric, really to allow for a lot of these applications and institutions to really connect together, be scalable, and then now really drive a lot of innovation through a lot of the machine learning that's also occurring. As a part of that overall philosophy, to really help our customers, specifically in education, we've had this long-standing program called AWS Educate. And through Educate, we offer really a tremendous amount of modules for individuals to learn, what it is like to have a career in the cloud or a cloud job type of career pathways. And that, what you call Educate program, has also now created a tremendous amount of partnerships, community colleges. It's actually been now part of many community colleges, their actual degree program, which actually became a very, very beneficial thing for this online that we can talk a little bit later with. And that is now really creating a flywheel for not just allowing individuals to learn new skills where we consider a lot of high skills that are in demand today, probably much more so after this crisis. And we are also not connecting just with certifications, but with real jobs, jobs with us, jobs with other companies. We today have over tens of thousands of technical jobs that are unfulfilled today. And so that entirely is not just to feed us, but many of our partners and our customers out there with that similar demand. So education is not just a business, but something that we believe that we can really improve, upskill a lot of the individuals out there, whether you're in high school, community college, or even four-year university folks.
Thank you. Stephen.
Yeah, as many of you probably know, Google was actually born out of a research project at a university. So it's pretty important to us as well. And I would say on two components, I think one from a product perspective, how can we help educators, universities, K-12, et cetera, bring things like Chromebooks into the classroom, bring things like cloud computing. But secondly, as well as I think that for Google, we're thinking about creating partnerships. And so we work with hundreds of educational technology companies regarding integrations and how do we make that full experience, because just putting technology in the classroom doesn't always solve problems. So how do we think about it holistically and make sure it's easy to use? And then obviously, like the others mentioned as well, really education is the future of our company, their company, all the leaders. So we need to make sure we're developing the right skills as they progress their educational careers.
Great. And Jessica, you touched about how important it is and fundamental to what Unity is doing. Maybe you could expand upon how you see the role of gaming helping people learn. And we call it invisible learning. I love that, obviously Microsoft is huge in gaming, Amazon is huge in gaming, and I'd love to get all perspective. But maybe you could talk about how you think about the opportunity to help people learn things through games and this concept of invisible learning.
Thanks, Michael. Yep, I've been in this for about 10 years. I started off trying to tackle it from how do we bring game-based learning into the classroom. And frankly, the challenges of the systems in place to be able to make that work at scale were too difficult for us to be able to make an impact at scale, which deliberately forced me personally to want to move into the gaming space. As we all know, kids on average, defined as 10 to 18 are spending an average about 5 hours a day playing video games around the world. It is significant. And we all know anecdotally from Minecraft, as Anthony mentioned, all the way up to Civ, how much one can learn from a game-based experience. And so similar to what I said before, we think of learning as infused in every single game experience, and really the game mechanics almost aligned with instructional design to deliver a strong learning outcome.
Yeah. Anthony, how does Microsoft think about gaming converging with learning, and what do you think the opportunity of the future could be?
Yeah, I think there's gamification, which certainly is certainly hugely valuable in terms of incentivizing. We've built that into our certification platform, Microsoft Learn, which provides open courseware for students to get job ready, and we put gamification elements there. That's helpful. Game-based learning, actually, with Minecraft, we've added both chemistry add-ins to let students learn how to understand chemical compositions, a code-based language inside of Minecraft to learn to do block editing or JavaScript coding inside of the game, using even plugins like Scratch, where you can actually use Scratch right inside of Minecraft. Getting students to think about technology as a tool for creation, whether it's using data to actually come to conclusions, using technology to express their ideas, that's the shift that we need to make. What helps with game-based learning is you can start to do that very young, where students and young learners don't think of technology as just a consumptive tool or a tool to do basic collaboration and productivity, but a tool that you can actually express things that weren't possible without technology as a tool. That's the thing that we've got to start very early as we drive a new thinking for learners and a new embrace of technology. The COVID-19 response is helping, where schools who were using technology for note-taking or basic collaboration and communication are now thinking differently about how they can do project-based learning, how they can think differently about using multimodal learning opportunities. We've got to reflect that with our technology platforms, and we've been seeing that with both integration of tools like Teams and the full stack of Microsoft productivity experiences. But really providing more flexibility is going to be important. I'm a big gamer myself, actually, and it's helped me both with problem solving, being able to think differently about the language as games do. Jessica mentioned this sort of design of the game-based rules that creates a new learning pathway. And that's something that I think research has shown I'm a big supporter of, and certainly Microsoft is pursuing.
Yeah, we're big believers that the gaming is going to help really transform the learning experience, and it's going to play a major role. As we talk about artificial intelligence, and it's basically here. I mean, we've been waiting and hoping for a long time, but you're starting to see its impact in society and business and education. IBM with Watson, Michael, you guys were a pioneer, and you guys were very generous with us, both in terms of the support of the ASU GSV Summit and Watson, but also, opening up your research, if you will, to helping us understand what Watson was doing. Where do you see artificial intelligence today as it relates to learning, and how do you see it in the future? What have we learned? And I think everybody on this call can participate, but I'm going to first give it to Michael. What do we know what do we learn from Watson?
Well, I think we've learned a lot. And first of all, this has been one of the technologies that scaled the fastest of any I've ever seen in my career. It was hard to almost keep up with the state of technology as we were building tools. Things were moving so fast. What I've seen happen is that Watson's really proliferated everywhere. It's in every corner of the technology that we develop, and we've really seen it across the market. We've got hundreds and hundreds of companies now that are using Watson within Watson API services within their applications and their content. Just looked at a small startup that's using Watson text-to-speech for a CDC training tool. Meeting this week with a company that's using Watson services to translate legal content across the globe. So we really seeded it, and it's pretty broadly used now across the marketplace. I think one of the things that we learned from the experience, not just in education, but particularly in education, though, is that AI is very much a big data tool. And a lot of institutions, whether in schools or in higher education, have never had a really strong data strategy. And so one of the things that, two things we've done now is to shift toward a greater emphasis on how we build the data infrastructure for learning. If you think about whether it's game content or anything, I've got a school district, for example, that has 341 digital learning tools in use across their classroom. So how do we pull data from that to be able to use it for things like career coaches and things where maybe we're looking at longitudinal experiences for students that span multiple courses. So we're doing a lot of work now around how do you build that data infrastructure. We're working with, as you know, the Department of Commerce actually has issued a recent paper talking about interoperable learner records. And so we think there's a really powerful opportunity to begin looking at standardized data platforms, kind of this learner record that would persist with you over time. And so we're doing a lot of work there. And we've also really started work with building out a whole new set of Watson services using some of the existing talent technology we have with Watson to build a new framework for talent across the entire life cycle.
Wow. Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. This has been, I guess, one of those silver linings in some of those, we'll call it the challenges that we've seen so far. But just take even a step back, machine learning has been something very core to us for almost 20 years. Many of you recognize all the recommendation engines on our .com, or even the robotics that are in our warehouse, or even the drones. Those are all driven and being created when it comes to machine learning. And we, in education, even prior to COVID, we're finding a tremendous amount of those education technology companies truly adopt machine learning within their actual offerings. And just one of the quick examples, top of my head, was Santillana, one of the large publishers out there based in Spain, wanted to help and assist educators grade papers. In certain countries, or certain educators are spending many, many hours with these national exams, especially the ones that are text written. So machine learning application would actually be able to read that text and provide an assessment of that particular student's written part of the examination. That ultimately was one of the huge benefactors of using some very intelligent type of machine learning technology for something very basic for an educator to save time. Now, during this COVID crisis, many of you may or may not know, but my boss, as well as our organization at Amazon, created a $20 million credit when it came to this COVID. And it's called the DDI, or the Diagnostic Development Initiative, where we provided these credits for researchers or healthcare providers to find and assist with a lot of the diagnosis and a lot of those tests that are a little bit out in shortage, if you will, in the marketplace. As a result, one of the grantees, or the recipients of the grants, University of British Columbia, alongside teaming with the Vancouver Health of the Hospital and a research institute there, got together to really take a look at how do I take the data that I'm receiving from a lot of the patients that are coming in, see if not that they are COVID positive, but how, we'll call it, how impactful is that COVID? How serious is that COVID? So do they need to go home, or do they need to be hospitalized or on a ventilator system? So they created that using machine learning, something called SageMaker that we have, a product that we have, that allows for less technical people to use, manipulate, reuse algorithms in order to get a lot of the outputs that they're looking. So that's going very well, and really trying to innovate well beyond just some of the teaching and learning, but also take a look at the actual machine learning and allow for faster information to be processed with larger sets of data.
Great. Anybody else have anything they want to say on the AI front?
I'll echo that what Michael said around collecting data is so important in order to build AI models. And I think we've seen two engagements with AI. The first is a lot of people, particularly with COVID as well, I'm seeing a lot of chatbots. And I think there's a tremendous amount of potential here. We've seen Penn State doing advising chatbots using AI. We've seen Strayer, now SEI, using financial aid chatbots. I think getting information to people is so important, and using AI to help improve the quality and personalize that. And the second component, I think, of where we're going is, as many of you probably use Google search, when you start to type something in, it will start to recommend what it thinks you're going to type. I could see that being so powerful in education, where a student is working on a project or a math problem, and they're getting to a point where they don't know exactly the next step. And if there's some sort of recommendation where it starts to provide, hey, we think this is what you might be going down towards, or here's the issue you're probably running into, and that's going to be AI powered. So I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity around personalization as we continue to build out the market.
Anything more? So I want to move on. So looking at, when you look at Coursera, what's fascinating to me is part of the 190 universities around the world. You've got now 56 million learners on the platform. But if you look at the 5 top or 6 top courses, 3 of them are actually from industry. So you've got Google IT Automation is number 1, IBM Data Science is number 3, Google IT Support ranked number 6, which is remarkable. I don't know if you saw the Scott Galloway article, the NYU professor, who talked about these potential partnerships between technology companies and universities creating programs. I don't know if anybody has a perspective on that. I see Stephen kind of shaking his head, so I don't know if you have anything to comment, but I think it's, do you think that's part of the future world of digital learning?
Yeah, it was interesting too to see some of the pairings they had. I think it was Google, MIT. I read Scott's article as well. And I do think what is great about that is pairing, and the last panel as well was talking about pairing partnerships between universities and employers. And that partnership, I think, is really important. And Google has really been thinking about lifelong learning. And I think the previous panel was talking about smaller credentials, smaller courses. And I do believe the IT professional certificate that we launched, the whole idea was you might have someone that went to school 20 years ago, they're thinking about a switch. As opposed to going and getting a whole nother degree, how could you provide a certificate which then is recognized by employers and they could find and make a career pivot? I'm interested in the idea. I think one thing we just have to be very careful of is those sorts of, if you really start to build a degree around it, you need to make sure that the skills are transferable. And it's not a Google MIT only focused on Google tools. I think we have to think about broader skill sets and ensuring that really is a transferable program.
Yeah, Michael, I go back to the last panel and there was some discussion about stackable credentials and an open ecosystem of learning. And I think that's how we look at it. I don't see an IBM university pairing as much as a broader ecosystem and the ability to partner across that. We've been a leader in issuing badges around IT pathways. And for example, we have a partnership with Northeastern. You can take a bundle of IBM badges now to Northeastern University and get college credit for those. And so this idea of credit transfer and articulation needs to happen broadly across the entire industry. So for years, I've been involved with the Business Higher Ed Forum. It's a coalition of university presidents and corporate executives that have been trying to build linkages between education and workforce. So we've really gotten a methodology to build digital credentials. We've got a lot of pairings then and partnerships across universities and employers to build these kind of digital pathways. And I think the future of education really is going to be built around this. We've launched a project around interoperable learner records to build a blockchain network. We're primarily working with National Student Clearinghouse and a set of other leading organizations to build that kind of open standards-based framework for the ability to exchange credentials. And I think the future is going to be really of education will be transformed by this idea of stackable credentials. It's going to change the nature of education in a lot of ways. And it's what's going to enable lifelong learning because, we no longer have this learn and then earn paradigm. We've got much more of a revolving door between education providers and the workforce. And the only way we're going to facilitate all of that is to bring everyone together into an open ecosystem around some basic credential standards. And so that's the way I see us partnering with the marketplace going forward.
Anthony, I'm going to come to you in a second because I want to talk about LinkedIn. I want to talk about credentials. But Jessica, talk about Unity in terms of how you think about, the brand of Unity, obviously a gigantic footprint in the gaming world. And I know you're training a lot of people around the world. How do you think about Unity as an education brand and kind of the future of that?
And I want to answer that while also building on Michael's comments. I think all of us have really similar models. We've partnered closely with universities. The professors and instructors are some of our best subject matter experts and instructional designers in creating the stackable credentials and the certifications. And where we see an opportunity, and I'll just give a little anecdote on this, is how do we better bring our customers and employers to the table in those partnerships? We did a partnership with the country of Senegal in Western Africa, where we wanted to basically create a unique Unity ecosystem that was more culturally relevant to Western African interactive experiences. And a key part of that partnership, in addition to the stackable credentials and the partnership with the universities, is how do we actually get the employers in Western Africa to be opening up the right entry-level jobs for the graduates, not just of the universities, but the alternative pathways too.
Yeah. So it's just 4 years ago. Sorry, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think it's always incredible to hear all the great things that are happening. And the one thing I'd also like to add in there is, for sure, online learning is going to be an incredible way to scale. The other approach that we also see that's been somewhat successful through partnerships has been actually about dual credits. Just especially with COVID, there's a lot of parents, probably a lot of folks listening to this panel session, especially with ones with children. There's a feeling that there's been a lost semester and the summer is not too far away. So what are we going to have for this next 6 months of true learning and really getting that? So one of the components that we launched with Northern Virginia Community College was to actually provide the actual AWS dual credit that was jointly created with Northern Virginia Community College, and the government, or the policymakers, their workforce, the governor, allowed for all those students, 70,000 of them, to actually receive credit. It's not just about AWS, but English, history. There are other basic things there so that many of these students could continue to progress. And the actual community college was going to pay that with a lot of the funding that will be coming through. So we just thought that was very interesting, that yet we could do online, but many folks, the credentials important, but still the credits are also important for a lot of the high schoolers to make sure that they achieve those. And that was some interesting things. The other part is hands-on learning. Even though we're in a COVID, learning the content is one thing, but I'll say that our friend at Cal Poly, President Jeff Armstrong, always talks about learn by doing. And so can we do that virtually? Those are the conversations we're having, but that innovation center that we installed at Cal Poly and at ASU, just to give a little bit of pandering shout out to Dr. Crowe and the team there, have been incredible leaders to innovate what they learn, not just take the certification and get a job, but really learn, apply real knowledge to that. So when they come out, it's not just about just a learning, taking an examination, but rather actually having artifacts and real projects out there.
So Anthony, I can't believe it's been 4 years, but 4 years ago, Microsoft purchased LinkedIn. A year before, $26 billion. The year before that, LinkedIn had bought Lynda for $1.5 billion. How do you see that whole, the conceptual opportunity for this ecosystem coming together was always fascinating. It kind of appears like it all is. How do you see LinkedIn as a platform going forward for the workforce and learning, and what are the kind of key things that you're focused on today with that?
Yeah, I certainly think that there's a lot of insight that we're providing to companies with the data graph from LinkedIn, and that's something that is used by many of the companies on this call. The reality is we are creating a pathway for people to connect their skills to jobs, which is going to be more important now than it frankly has ever been. We also want to create an opportunity to learn where new skills can be applied, where you can align your talents to the workplace, as well as identify where your talents need to be built up. This is one of the things we often talk about as sort of a frankly overused cliche that the jobs of the future haven't been invented yet. And that's a fairly big challenge that we're giving to educators, where they're not able to easily identify the types of career shifts that are happening in the market. So we can do that with LinkedIn, where students can get insight of where they need to increase their skilling to align to job growth, as well as make sure that they're connecting to available employers. That's something that we're embracing across the company. It's certainly going to be our mission to not only help get future generations of learners to employment, but to help reskill and upskill existing folks that have been displaced from work. And so LinkedIn is going to be a key part of that work for us, as well as GitHub, to provide this collaboration of an open community to share and build their tech skills through technology. So those are things that I think we're leaning on. But there are many other tools for job placement and job skills, but we're working on both integrating Microsoft's core learning platform, which is Microsoft Learn, which provides Microsoft skilling, with LinkedIn Learning, which provides a broader range of skills that are needed by learners to get ready for the future.
So we just have barely over 5 minutes left, and there's a number of things I'd like to get your thoughts on. So I'm going to ask if we can even get it tighter, just to get some reactions, because I think it's I really like to hear your views on some things. First, just on some technologies, voice-enabled technologies. What do we think the future of that is for learning? With Alexa, let me hear kind of the AWS perspective of that first.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize. I even forgot the entire machine learning with even Alexa, and I always have to turn the Alexa off when I'm speaking about the technology. It's definitely one of the more exciting areas. We actually invested already some time well ahead of even this COVID to truly take a look at how we can leverage a lot of the power of how to communicate with the educators or the school information back to the parents. Just some basic things like that. So we actually have already, as many of you know, hundreds of millions of these devices already in the homes. And we really wanted to find a way to keep it simple, whether there's a skill that we can create that allows for all that interoperability of that information for somebody to just voice activate and get those answers relatively quickly. So we created a skill that connects to the variety of all the largest learning management systems, student information systems. So now parents can really go, Alexa, are there any updates from school? Or Alexa, what assignments does Rosario have to do tomorrow? Or when is the next examination? Basic things like that that would take sometimes minutes, if not hours, for folks to find can just do that in the comfort of their home. Additionally, what's exciting about that is that we not only got a tremendous amount of interest, we also created during this COVID example where the communication needed to become a lot more automated. I think the other gentleman from Google mentioned about call centers. We saw an incredible uptick of that. And now we have created a Q&A chatbot where educators or someone like myself, non-technical, can actually create questions and allow that to be answered. And that was extremely important for school closings, COVID updates, and a variety of other things. So I'll pause there, Michael, just respecting your time.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments on the voice-enabled opportunity?
I think it creates a great opportunity for different types of learning. And, for example, if you have a student who's dyslexic, as opposed to opening up a encyclopedia, they now have another opportunity to engage and learn. I think the one piece of advice I'd have is how do we ensure that we keep the voice siloed from just a specific type of hardware? So ensuring that voice learning can happen over multiple types of devices, I think is really important.
So I'm gonna give you one word, hype, overhyped, about right, or underhyped. A few different technologies. I'd like everybody's perspective. I'm gonna go around the horn, start with Jessica. 5G.
That's right.
Michael.
Just right.
Anthony.
Yes, right.
Stephen.
Potentially underhyped.
Okay, I'm with you. Andrew.
We're waiting for it. It's good.
Virtual reality, augmented reality. Jessica.
Of course, totally underhyped.
Okay. Michael.
Underhyped.
Anthony.
Underhyped for AR and maybe overhyped for VR.
Okay, good. Stephen.
Say just right.
Andrew.
Underhyped.
Okay. Blockchain. Jessica.
Overhyped.
Michael.
Underhyped.
I'm with you. Anthony.
Underhyped.
Okay. Stephen.
I'm gonna go just right. Take the middle course there.
Andrew.
I'm going to say I'll take the middle road as well.
Okay. That's awesome. Recognizing we just have 2 minutes left, so this has to be a tight answer. If you were to predict what's going to be the most different about the education sector in 2030, what would you say? And I'm going to give the first, Andrew, since you shake your head, I'm going to give you the first.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say beyond technology, I think there's going to be a lot of questions around seat time versus competency and how funding works according there, especially for places like the US. I think there's going to be a tremendous more of demands of what you learn to apply it to an occupation, and the credentialing for sure are one of those particular areas. The other area is financing. I think there's a lot of debt in the US, and there's going to be a lot of questions of the value of a lot of those particular types of degrees that are going to be received. So those are probably the future of things, the questions, big questions that need to be addressed by that time.
Thank you, Michael.
I think we're going to see a real transformation of the industry around the individual, and tools like credentials and competency-based assessments and the ability to move that individual across providers and through the system is going to have a profound impact on the overall education training marketplace. And it's going to be underway by 2030. I'm not sure we'll see it complete by then.
Stephen.
I think it's around analytics and much more data-driven decisions, less siloed analytics, more integration, and that's going to be key to things like artificial intelligence.
Jessica.
I think it'll be viewed less as a sector and more as a leading indicator for the valuation of companies based on what the talent is of their existing base and their future base.
Anthony, you get the last word.
Yeah, certainly I'll build on everything everyone has said. I agree with all of it. More blended, certainly more purposeful in terms of students getting skills they need for doing, making, and careers, and more personalized in terms of using data to individualize experiences, and of course, more lifelong, that the notion of reskilling will permeate every industry, and that will be something that the education system will need to respond to much more than just corporate learning environments today.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It was an awesome panel. A lot of fun. You guys were terrific. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
You all be safe.
All right, well now we're gonna, for cleanup here, it's my privilege to introduce our final visit with former governor of Florida and our friend Jeb Bush, and then my partner Deborah Quazza, who is bravely playing off the injured reserve list and I think ready to roll with her interview with Governor Bush. So Deborah, take it away.
Deborah, you there?
Sorry, got off mute. That's the standard Zoom problem. Jeb, it's wonderful to be with you. Hold on one second. Let me get my one obstacle out of the way. I couldn't be there in my home state of Florida with you, so I brought my mother's Jacksonville, Florida garden behind me. So you'll appreciate the St. John's River in the background. Anyway, we're delighted to have you here today on our really last session of our April series today. So obviously, incredibly successful two-term Florida governor. You are education first in your work as governor in Florida, and it's an area that you remain, very mission and passion driven around with Excel in Ed and other things that you do. I thought let's start with the pandemic because I'd like to kind of get your thinking, your comment on that, and the pandemic driven experiment with remote learning. Today, the Wall Street Journal had a headline that said some school districts are planning to end the year early, calling remote learning too tough. And then we had 40% of district leaders were polled, and they said they could not support in-home learning even for a day. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Is this a pass or a fail? What have we learned? How do we improve this? What were your lessons from Florida?
Well, thanks for having me, Deborah. I hope you're recovering from your injury.
Much better.
The pandemic is a game changer, and a lot of times when you have a crisis like this, it creates the opportunity to make more transformational change, and we'll see how that plays out. Monopolies in general are the most resistant to that kind of change, but the record is mixed for sure. You have 13,000 school districts. Some of them, based on a political decision, said if we can't provide access to learning via the internet, we're not going to everyone. We're not going to provide it to anyone. Others couldn't do it they just weren't prepared. They didn't do the training necessary, and others flourished and did really well. And so I would start by saying that all school districts need to learn this as the lessons learned of success and failure and improve, because distance learning is going to be part of the strategy to open up the schools. If we're going to socially distance in classrooms and people are talking about 10 feet between desks, I mean, you think about middle school with 10 feet difference, you're going to have a split arrangement where maybe Mondays and Wednesdays kids come to school, and Tuesdays and Thursdays a separate cadre of kids come to school, and on Friday there's online learning. There's going to be lots of different approaches. All of them are going to include online learning. And I think parents, having gone through this experience, most of which has been pretty traumatic, are going to want to have a better sense of how they can help their children learn. And so the opportunity would be, there's all sorts of, the last panel is the answer in so many ways, to listen to them talk about things. There's huge opportunities for us to get this right. And the final thing I'd say is, there will be a huge outcry, already started, that we need to bail out the schools, we need to bail out education budgets. There will be shortfalls, and the federal government has already provided a pretty healthy slug of money. I would argue for making the first dollar spent be the ones that deal with this issue, rather than to backfill deficits. Use the money to reform, to fix the things that will make learning, move to a 21st century model. And so we'll see. I mean, Excel and Ed is working hard to encourage commissioners of education and governors to be bigger and bolder at this time, rather than play defense. And we're hopeful that many states will do that.
So Jeff, I think to that, I mean, remote learning is a term everyone's using, and it's interesting to me. It's kind of code for a couple things. One is it's home learning. So these successes and failures have underscored is that we are for the preponderance of low-income students that don't have devices and don't have bandwidth at home, they're missing the opportunity to learn at home. It's not really remote's really almost the wrong word, and because home or a different place than school is where most students and children spend their days. And so have you been, what do you think about how we, from a government, whether it's federal government, state government, local, how do we solve what is clearly an issue that our students are not just ill-equipped to move into a remote learning environment, but on a day-to-day basis, low-income students are not getting the same opportunity to learn digitally anyway, if digital is the future, which I believe it is, at home. So what do you think about? Yeah.
Well, first, I think we should get the right data points. A majority of people in this country can access learning from the home, a majority of low-income students, but there is a gap, without a doubt. We spend billions of dollars in E-rate. We spend billions of dollars in technology budgets. A lot of it is vendor driven. No disrespect to the large ed tech companies that go traipse around the country selling stuff, software and equipment. Maybe we should create a national strategy that's implemented locally to deal with this one pressing problem that once we get fixed, could be a long-term investment of great benefit. And so I would argue that if there is to be an infrastructure fund, this should be the highest priority, that we ought to reallocate monies, whether it's in the E-rate program, if that's possible to do, or other means to be able to deal with this digital divide. It's been talked about now for how long? 15, 20 years.
Yep.
And now's the chance, I think, the opportunity to fix it. And then the question is, are teachers, they need to be trained to teach in this new format, and parents need to be totally engaged to be able to enhance the learning. Deborah, I'd add one other thought, and that is maybe we get to the point where the learning is flipped, where the teacher actually, the homework is what's done in the classroom, and the learning is done at home, and the teacher then can be a coach for the students to make sure that they've actually mastered the material. That would be, you could do that if you eliminated the digital divide.
I think that's right. You even see with Khan Academy. In fact, that's what saw a lot of the usage with Khan Academy early on was, both teachers learning at home and students learning at home. And then, because I also think there's a question of if we're not equipped to do remote learning in K-12, and one of the earlier panels talked about the incredible demand for online solutions for working adults. So if we're not equipping, K-12 students to be online, digital learners, then we're probably not equipping them for the modern workforce. And that seems to be an issue of global competitiveness. I don't know what you think about that, but.
Yeah, all I can tell you is the After Action report will be full of phenomenally great examples. Miami-Dade County, my home school district's the 4th largest in the United States. I think everybody here is learning remotely, and it's been effective, and they trained for it. And they made it a high priority prior to the virus to make this part of the education experience. And then Fairfax County, the head of the IT department just got fired because they couldn't deliver. Literally, and Fairfax spends a lot more than Miami-Dade per student. So I just would argue that we need to take the best practices and apply them. And teacher development needs to shift towards this area as well, because teachers are overwhelmed. This is an extraordinarily difficult challenge, and they need backup.
Yep. Well, I think one of the silver linings here is there's also been an incredible groundswell of appreciation for great teachers from all the parents who are now at home trying to, fortunately my children are too old for that, so I've just had to watch all my my partners work through with their younger children.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard that 5th grade math is really hard.
But I do hope that also one of the silver linings here is that there is a groundswell of appreciation for the great teachers out there working they're themselves to death to try to do YouTube to engage students in this new environment. But I do your comment on Miami-Dade leads me to kind of a question on general leadership and leadership in a crisis. I think that Miami-Dade's had arguably terrific, long-standing, strong leadership of its school system, and so I just what do you think about the role of leadership? Can we, and I guess the other comment I would make is that you can actually, I was reading statistics yesterday on China, and their Ministry of Education basically launched 22 online course platforms during the pandemic, which had supported 24,000 courses. So they basically sent a national, and I know that we're adamantly against national control of education for a whole, variety of good reasons. But how do we scale district, great leadership at the district level into a national phenomenon like what they've seen in China, which where arguably their pandemic move to online learning was very successful. Anyway, just love to get your thinking on that.
Leadership matters on good days. It really matters during pandemics and disasters and crises. And the kind of leadership we need now is the servant leadership. It's humble, it's fact-based, it's telling people the truth, but giving them hope. It's connecting with them on a human level, showing empathy. This is a very dangerous, difficult time. State budgets, the pension obligations are now going to become a bigger part of the budget because we've had shortfalls, and that'll hurt the here and now spending. Pension obligations remain the same. Private schools that provide so much support, 10% of all students go to private schools. Well, if people have lost their income, they're probably not going to be as anxious to spend money on private tuition. The corporate tax scholarship in Florida works when you have corporate taxes to credit. If there's no corporate taxes, you'll see a reduction in the largest school choice program, private school choice program in the country. So in moments like this, you want to tell people the truth, you want to give them hope, you want to connect with them in an empathetic way, and then take advantage of the challenge to turn it into a huge opportunity. And so that's Carvalho here in Miami-Dade, I think, is a great example of that, and many others are as well. None of this is going to change unless parents and community leaders say enough of this. Without parental engagement, government-run monopolies just don't go quietly in the night. I know that's politically incorrect, and I apologize for those that may not sense that that's the way you're supposed to be talking these days, but they don't. They don't change unless there is pressure, and without parent involvement, I don't see that happening naturally. In the private sector and in the philanthropic world, in the not-for-profit world, change happens quicker because there's an imperative to make things better. If you don't, you may not survive. Governments are the last entities that will make that change, and people will have to demand it.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about, you've obviously spent significant energy and to the K-12 system, but we're going to see coming out of this, I think obviously there's going to be enormous pressure, and some of the earlier panels talked about, incredible pressure on the higher education system. And we've already got the issue of declining enrollments and economic stresses. And I think we're already beginning to see state budget whacks at the at higher ed, higher ed allocations. So what do you think about, and then you guys have been very involved in the dual enrollment's been a big issue for you all, which I believe is one of those important linking bridges between K-12 and higher ed. So any reflections on what you think coming out of the pandemic will be potentially positive catalysts in higher education and
This is the walls were closing in on public universities and private, except for the fanciest ones, yep, prior to the pandemic. And this will only accelerate it. So K-12 will get a lot of its money back, if not all. We'll see how the Congress appropriates money. Higher ed won't. And so you have rising student debt, recourse debt on the backs of students. You can't continue to raise tuition. And so the schools that educate 90% of all the students, most of whom are not 19-year-olds, most of whom are either going back to get a degree of relevance for their lives, or they're trying to complete a degree. That's where the danger is. And I think there needs to be a lot of philanthropy and a lot of state support for these universities, but along with it, there should be reforms. We should not call a four-year degree 4 years unless a student has the capability of actually graduating in 4 years. And in many places, they can't do that. Online learning is another place where there's all sorts of innovations taking place in the university space, and that should continue to accelerate. There are places in the United States that prohibit that. States with large number of students that aspire to a better life, California being one of them, New York, where the barriers of entry, sadly to say, I think Illinois may be on that list, where the barriers of entry of innovation are there, and they're real. So hopefully out of this, there will be continued support through state governments and federal government, of course, but I think along with that, there should be significant reforms. And then as it relates to dual enrollment, of course, we should be expanding these things. 25% of all juniors are capable of taking college level work, and only 3 or 4% do. Who's fooling who here? I mean, this customizing the learning experience to make sure kids that are struggling aren't just pushed along, and kids that could learn at a faster rate aren't held back, has got to be the great imperative for K-12 education and higher education going forward.
Well, and it also pulls some of the high, to your point, since, you know, the K-12 system is less economically vulnerable, arguably, it pulls some of that, you know, some of that economics into the high school.
That's right.
Might have been spent in higher ed, which I think is also really important. Let me ask you a question about political will. You know, I think that all of us, or at least I'll speak for myself, are pretty enamored with Dr. Fauci. You know, we hang
Brad
on.
Pitt?
Yeah, exactly. Brad Pitt and Dr. Fauci, the Brad Pitt of healthcare. He, you know, we hang on every word. He's admired and speaks the truth. And certainly the pandemic has been, you know, a tragedy on 1,000 different levels. But the reality is, you know, we still have, despite rising graduation rates, high school graduation rates here in Chicago, we've seen a precipitous increase in graduation. We still have 1.2 million students still drop out of high school every year, which is just a stunning number when you correlate that to healthcare issues, whether it's COVID or anything else. And when do you think we'll have the political will to for the country, the culture, the federal government, the whatever, to take these issues as seriously as if they were a human health issue? Because they absolutely are. So I'm just curious when you think that will, and then also comment on this presidential race, not necessarily the final race, but I mean, even coming up to this race, I never felt that there was an adequate discussion of education as an issue, except for the free college thing.
Yeah, I don't even think any of the debates an education question came up in the Democratic debates, and in 16, a similar kind of situation. Part of that is the dichotomy that K-12 education, at least, is locally administered. Policies are created at the state level. The federal government plays a supportive when they're doing it right, and you know, they're marginal at best. I mean, 10% of the funding comes from the federal government. So I think part of this will be, we have to change the political environment where taking risks are rewarded again. We're reaching out across the aisle is rewarded. I mean, every big initiative that I got to do or tried to do, the first impulse was, let me find a Democrat that doesn't look like me to be my partner in this. Now, if you do that, and I see it on my Twitter feed, when you like advocate something like that, you're a rhino if you're a Republican. I don't know what you are if you're a Democrat that would dare do it, because very few do.
Right.
So there needs to be, people can decide if they want to change the political culture, because it's who we are. If they want to change it, then they reward politicians that are trying to advance the cause of reform in a more bipartisan way. And education would be a great place to do it. I believe the United States is best when we're a bottom-up country. So when China does something great, that's fine. That's the Chinese way. America at its best, there's someone in a garage right now that is going to do something that he won't be or she won't be able to explain to me, because it'll be way over my head, but it's going to change the world. And it's more likely to happen in this environment than it would if everybody was content. So I'm an optimist about how we change this, but Our political culture is us. It's not some extraneous thing. It's a circus mirror, but it's a mirror of who we are. And if we're going to be vulgar, and if we're going to attack each other, and if we're going to not try to solve problems, but push people down to make ourselves look better, if that's who we are, then we shouldn't be surprised we have a political system that mirrors that.
Perfect. Wonderful, wonderful comment. I think that's actually a perfect way. We're ending on the nose. That is, if you have any last sort of optimism coming out into the AD, it's like we like to call it the AD world, after disease, having gone from BC before Corona. Any last thoughts?
You know what? Just tell Mom she's got a beautiful garden.
Thank you. Jeb, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I'm with you on the political point, and I hope we can all join together and find a Dr. Fauci for education and get those issues to the forefront of everybody's mind. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Take care. Thanks.
All right. And with that, I think we're just going to, as I think my partner Michael mentioned earlier, tomorrow we have a final special session, actually at 4 o'clock Pacific, so a different time, a fireside chat between Michael Moe and President Crowe from Arizona State. Crowe knows what's next for America's most innovative university. Otherwise, we really appreciate everyone for joining us over this month. We will have a shortened schedule, most likely in May, maybe 2 sessions on Wednesdays, and we'll be back out with that shortly. And hopefully after that, we'll be fully into an AD world. But thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of the week.